So, like Jason said, my name is Tom. I'm on a mission to make philosophy sexy again. I'm very glad to see some allies in that mission right here. As you see, I try to get all the help I can get, even from LME and other things. We'll jump right in, right? So imagine one day you're on your way to work, you're walking, and then suddenly you hear a loud noise behind you. There's people screaming, and the noise seems to be coming closer. So you turn around, and you see a tram trolley bouldering down the hill. It's empty, nobody's in it. Obviously the brakes are broken. It's completely run away, right? It's a bit like the train tracks out front the center here. You see what's about to happen, because just ahead of you there are 5 railway workers. They are working on these rails. They have headphones on. They are unaware of what is happening. They cannot see the tram coming. So there's no way of stopping this tram. But you notice there's a little lever on the side, which would make the tram switch tracks, which would save the 5 people. Unfortunately, there's also another person on that track. So they would die. The tram is going really fast. You have 5 seconds to make a decision, and I will ask all of you to make that decision right now. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds, who would pull the lever, save 5 people, and kill 1 person?
Can it do both ways?
There are only 2 options.
Can I make a decision by
I'm raising my voice. Raise your hands high as well. Very good. Okay. Can anybody explain why they would do this? Who raised their hand and can tell us why they raised their hand?
Because the person on the other track is horrible. I know that.
And if you don't know the person, if it's any people, why would you pull the lever?
It's just a math. 1 against 5.
It's just a map, right?
I was going to say, in the words of Star Trek, the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, is there somebody in this room who would not pull this lever? Okay, very good. Care to explain why?
Yeah, I can explain, because then I will make a deliberate decision to kill the person.
Yes. Okay, very good. So, this is a decision you make about something you do. I ask, why do you do this or why do you do that? And you're able to give an answer, right? So that shows that we can reason about what is the right thing to do in these situations and in others. So I'd like to congratulate you, because you're now actively engaging in the field of what philosophy calls ethics. Right? It's the most practical branch of philosophy. It talks about what should I do. And it tries to build theories and underlying principles. And it likes to use thought experiments like this one. This is the classic trolley problem. And obviously it's an easy one. There is an obvious right answer. So you could try to generalize this obvious right answer. What was it? The needs of the few outweigh the needs of the...
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
There we go. So we want to minimize suffering, maximize good results, right? If you generalize this, you say, I make decisions based on the consequences. If you think like this, congratulations, you're a consequentialist. And you're a very good company. Many good philosophers are consequentialists. But of course, it's not always this easy. We can even alter this thought experiment only slightly. So right now, there are only 5 people, there's only 1 track. But you see somebody cycling past you, between you and the tram track, and you can give them just a little nudge. They will fall on the train tracks, and that will derail the tram. And the 5 people will be saved. Obviously, poor cyclist will not be saved. So, in this situation, what would you do in 5 seconds? Would you push the cyclist, killing them, saving 5 people? Or would you do something else? So, in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Who would push the cyclist? Very good. Different people. So even though the consequences would be the same, you sacrifice one person to save 5, it feels like a different question. So there has to be more than consequences when we consider the question of what should I do. So in the next 20 minutes, we'll go through 2 other theories about ethics. Very good. We'll start with, I'll introduce your new best friend. He's called Immanuel Kant. He lived a good 300 years ago in the city of Königsberg, over there, which was then in the German state of Prussia. Now it's called Kaliningrad, it's in Russian. And he was your stereotypical modern philosopher. He was a professor at the university. He liked to smoke pipes, sit down, write books that are very difficult to read. And he was known for his routine and his rigor. He used to go on daily walks, and they would say that his neighbors would set their watch to his exact time. That's how punctual he was. He never really traveled outside of the city. He never went more than a few miles. He never even saw the sea, which is pretty impressive, looking at where he lived. He was one of the main contributors, one of the former thought leaders in the movement of enlightenment. He was a radical free thinker. People in philosophy spent entire careers on trying to analyze and implement what he said. Obviously today we only have about 20 minutes, minus some tech issues. So we can only scratch the surface, but I promise you that will be more than enough. And to be honest, we've reached the limits of my expertise pretty soon anyway. But I do want to share this quote from him, and I'm going to read it out loud. So, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. This immaturity is self-imposed, when its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolve and courage. And then this, sapere aude, dare to know, that is the motto of enlightenment. So I'm a Scrum Master and an Agile coach. This, of course, is right up my alley. It's about challenging the status quo, and knowing it's not enough. It's about doing too. We have to grow, we have to develop, we have to learn to think for ourselves. So I'd say dare to know should be the motto of Agile. About his ethical theories, there's so when we make decisions about what we do, this could be a structure. We do something to get some kind of result, which is justified by something else. Kant calls this a conditional imperative, and it's not good enough for him. Right? Often this justification comes from outside. Often it's some kind of deity, right? Because religions spend a lot of time telling us what to do and what not to do. He wants something else. He wants something that you are able to discover by reasoning only and not by divine revelation. So he wants something that carries its own justification. Much like a good unit test carries its own data, it does not rely on a database somewhere. So you see Kant and software engineering practices are pretty much the same thing. He goes looking for a categorical imperative, which is rationally necessary. You are able to discover it by pure reasoning. And this is also the time of the universal theory of gravity and stuff like this. Enlightenment, it's about what is universally, eternally applicable. And so this is the mission that he gives himself. Can I come up with something that complies with this model? In his typical rigorous style, he comes up with a few formulations. Today we'll work with this one. So the rule is, act only according to that rule, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Sounds a bit funny in English and it's translated, so a bit more explanation. So what he means to say with you can will it, so the opposite is you cannot will something that is irrational or that is self-contradictory. Right? And so this is his rule from which we can which we can apply in real situations. for example, the simple question of should I tell a lie? If we follow Kant's reasoning, to get the answer to this question, we should wonder what will happen if everybody lies all the time. So yeah, it feels a bit like modern day social media, etc. But if we push it to the extreme, if everybody lies all the time, then it means that telling the truth is no longer happening. Lying is the opposite of telling the truth. So if telling the truth disappears, then you cannot lie anymore, and therefore we have a contradiction. So it's impossible to tell a lie if there is no truth, and therefore Kant's very simple answer is no, you should not tell a lie. This is universal, eternal, so you should never, ever, ever tell a lie. That's how simple it is. So let's see if we can apply this very simple logic to a question that I, as a Scrum Master, sometimes get confronted with. If you carry a different role, by the way, feel free to change the question, but follow the same reasoning, right? So, team asks me, should we skip the retro this time? Right? I understand you recognize this question. So what would our friend Kant say? Well, if we skip the retro all the time, then we cannot inspect and adapt our effectiveness, and that would go against the purpose of Scrum. Right? So we cannot be a Scrum team and skip a retro, therefore, no, we never skip a retro. Looking a bit broader at the role of the Scrum Master, I hope you recognize this phrase. The Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. So if we try to establish anything else or anything that goes against the Scrum Guide, that would be self-contradictory as a Scrum Master. So I think it's fair to say Kant would be very strict. And I think this Scrum Police term would apply. Although I think we have to give him a bit more credit. This is a very simplistic interpretation of what he says. In his time, he also had the Bible that he could refer to, but he did not do that, so I want to give him all more credit. And he was all for, discovering it yourself and growing, etc. So this is another question I maybe not ask out loud, but I definitely ask it to myself. Somebody comes to me with a problem, and I wonder, should I take their problem as my problem? Same reasoning. If all the problems become my problems, there's no more such thing as my problem and their problem. So we have a contradiction, and therefore the problem is still theirs. Don't use me to outsource your problem. It's your problem, I will guide you and help you solve it, but it's your problem. Right? So I do think Kant would make a hell of a coach. You'll be very strong on consistency. To summarize Kant, in our thought experiment earlier, it was all about consequences. Kant, as you see, is all about rules. And that's why his ethical theory is called the deontology, after the Greek word for duty. So in his way of thinking, to do good is to follow the rules. They are the same. So if you try to extend that, scale it up to an organization, I think what would you get? It's all about following the rules.
Same results.
Same results. But there's a specific term for an organization that's big on rules. Bureaucracy, right? Bureaucracy is great in theory, but it's not very practical. So that's why we'll go looking for a third type of ethical theory. We'll actually go back a lot further in time, about 2.5 millennia ago. We are in Greece, where Aristotle lived. He went all over the place, he did travel a lot. He was a student of Plato, who was also a very well-known philosopher, something of a cave. Was the tutor, the teacher to Alexander, the Macedonian king, who would become Alexander the Great and conquer most of the known world. And he is the father of science and logic. Briefly, he literally wrote the book on zoology and has great observations about marine life on the island of Lesbos, for example. He's very big on logic as well. So these syllogisms like all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, therefore we can conclude definitively that Socrates is mortal too. Very strong work. And even Kant recognized his work. Like Kant would say, with Aristotle, logic has reached its completion. Kant unfortunately did not know that a few years later a man, George Boole, would be born, and that people in our time would refer to logic always as Boolean logic. Not even with a capital, that's how we bring it. So, but we care about his ethical theory, and Aristotle approaches the question slightly different. He starts with, what does it take to be a good person? What is a good person? Obviously a very ethical question to ask, and a very dangerous question. So we'll first work with an analogy. Let's look at a knife. How would you define a good knife?
Sharp.
Sharp, yeah. A good knife is a knife that cuts well. Yeah? That's what you use a knife for. That is what its function is. That is what sets it apart from all the other things that are not knives. Right? So imagine having a knife that is incapable of cutting anything. I think you would stop calling it a knife, you might call it a spatula. So a good knife cuts well, that's its function. So now we have to go looking for, okay, if you want to answer the question, what is a good person? We have to define the function of a person. So let's try this. Procreation, making babies. Is that our function? Is that what sets us apart from all the other things that are not people? Animals procreate as well, right? So therefore, procreation cannot be what our function is, right? So unfortunately, being good at procreation does not necessarily make you a good person. Aristotle has a different definition. He says man is like an animal, but he's a rational animal. Or they are a rational animal. So to be a good person, for him, means to be a reasonable person, by definition. And so if you want to be a very good person, we have to have excellent exercise of the intellect, is what he says. So for Aristotle, the highest good that we can achieve is to have this. If we have excellent exercise of the intellect, we reach eudaimonia, where eu means good and demon means spirit. In English, it's often translated as happy, happiness. But I don't agree with that translation. I don't think it does it justice. Being a good person is not about feeling happy all the time. In fact, sometimes I feel quite miserable, exactly because I try to be a good person. So flourishing is a lot better term. So DJ Aristotle would not say, is everybody happy? He would say, is everybody flourishing? So his ethical theory is all about the pursuit of excellence. But we use the Latin term for it. It's the pursuit of virtue. Vir is Latin for man. So virtus is translated as excellent qualities of man. Right? So Aristotle's ethical theory is a theory of virtue. It's a virtue ethics, which you might recognize from Bible studies, etc. But that's because I think Thomas of Aquin read Aristotle and thought, hey, that's a great idea, let's bring that into Christianity as well. Which is something that happens a lot in history. So, virtues, excellent qualities of people. And Aristotle distinguishes two types of virtues, the intellectual virtues and the moral virtues. The intellectual virtues are about thinking excellently, and you develop them by studying, by doing maths and logic, critical thinking, things like that. Moral virtues, on the other hand, are about acting excellently. And you develop them not by thinking, but by doing. Aristotle lists a bunch of virtues explicitly, so I've written down a few of what he says. Courage, temperance, modesty, friendliness. These are all qualities of good people. And you could see them as opposite to some kind of vice, right? A soldier who's not courageous is probably a coward. Somebody who's not friendly is, I'm also not a native speaker, surliness. Yeah? But Aristotle makes it a bit more complicated and a bit more nuanced. Because if we take the example of our courageous soldier, imagine they don't want to be a coward, they want to be on the opposite extreme. So when the battle begins, throws off all his armor, runs towards the enemy, starts fighting them, and will not last very long, right? They will kill him straight away. And I think we can all agree that a dead soldier is not a very good soldier. Virtues are about excellence. So on one end of the spectrum, we have cowardice. On the other end of the spectrum, we have recklessness. Courage is defined as the optimum point between those two vices. And that's why they're called the golden mean. So there's a spectrum. On one end we have shyness. On the other end we have shamelessness. When we are modest, we are exactly at the optimum. It also means that we cannot be too courageous. We can be too reckless, we can be too cowardly, but you can never be too courageous. So that actually helps us answer the question of, okay, what should I do? So Aristotle is also very simply saying, just do what a good person would do. Which begs the question, okay, what is that? How do I know what a good person would do, right? Well, you know if you're a good person. So then the question is, how do I become a good person? Well, you become a good person by doing what a good person does, which sounds oddly circular. So you could accuse him of circular reasoning, but I have a slightly different mental image. I think of a spiral. Because doing something changes me, makes me hopefully a better person, and therefore I will know better what a good person would do. Right? And therefore, next time I do something slightly different, and I become slightly different again. And so, so in his way of thinking, there is this constant dance between doing and being and knowing, and it's a spiral where you grow. You grow by doing, maybe actively choosing to do something, but as you do it more often, it becomes second nature, and it becomes your character. So this way of becoming a good person is all about building character. And hopefully, soon, you'll start doing the right thing without thinking about it. And that's not enough, because you do the right thing, but also for the right reasons, at the right time, with the right people, in the right way. That's it. You become a good person by doing it. So there's some room here for fake it till you make it. Right? How do you kickstart the spiral? We like to imagine or identify some people in our community who we all agree on are good people, and we start doing what they do. So these are exemplars, our idols, our heroes, that at the beginning we imitate so that we become better. And we take, that builds our character so that we will start doing the right thing automatically. So there, now Aristotle is our Scrum Master, and he gets the same question. So his would be this. Your team. What will a good Scrum team do in this case? And they were like, yeah, we shouldn't do it. Or maybe a really good Scrum team, in this case, would actually skip the ribbon. So there's a lot more nuance, right? It's not as simple as Kant, there's a lot of nuance. If we think about Aristotle's way of interpreting the role of a Scrum Master, the first question we should ask, what is the function of a Scrum Master? What makes them unique? Much like Kant, the function of a Scrum Master is to establish Scrum. But there's an add-on, as opposed to some other roles that exist. Scrum Master has no formal authority over people. Right? So that can inform us about where a Scrum Master should be really good. It begs the question, okay, good. Now that we know this, then what are the virtues? What are the excellences of a Scrum Master? So, for example, you could say a good Scrum Master is persuasive and consistent and respectful. And you can wonder, okay, good, where's the golden mean then? If I have to be consistent, I have to watch out, am I becoming dogmatic, which is a vice? Am I becoming too pragmatic, which is a vice? So in every situation, you can ask yourself as a Scrum Master, how can I be consistent here? If I do this, is it maybe too dogmatic or too pragmatic? Where is the golden mean in this particular situation? And of course, he would also ask himself continuously, what would a good Scrum Master do? Who are your exemplars? I've listed a few here. So in a given situation, sometimes I wonder, what would Jurgen do in this situation? Or what would Mike do? So I invite you all to imagine or remember or see some exemplars from your past. Maybe that really good teacher you had, or that one good boss. They do exist apparently. Or your football coach, or your favorite religious icon. Right? What would Jesus do? So to finish off, I see Aristotle as a Scrum Master can be a great mentor, a great teacher, and you can wonder then, okay, these virtue ethics, our third option after consequentialism and deontology, what would happen if we scale up virtue ethics to a bigger team organization? And the answer is, I don't really know. So virtue ethics works great in a relatively small community or a team, but how to scale it up is not very clear, which is very similar to Agile, I would say. We know a lot about how to do it in the small, but scaling Agile, nobody really knows. And I don't think that's the only thing that virtue ethics have in common with Agile. I would argue that what, for example, the Scrum Guide calls values, Aristotle might call them virtues. And I think that Aristotle would say that Scrum itself is a virtue. It's about commitment to excellence and becoming good. Then to wrap it up, who of the two would be the best Scrum Master? I think it's obviously a silly question, because they're not Scrum Masters, they're philosophers. But that doesn't stop us from seeing them maybe as exemplars or from getting inspiration from their ways of thinking. And this is something I want to extend, and I'd like to call you all to action. I would like to ask you all to go forth and philosophize here today at the bar or wherever, because I think we need more philosophy to build better organizations. There's a saying that no good philosopher younger than 30 exists. Philosophers know this, so just like I did, there's evening school at university or at a local education center. So I really urge you to go out there to study and to do philosophy, so we can have better organizations, and maybe even more important, do philosophy because it makes you a better person.